Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I am very excited to be giving you my full review of Nikon's 40mm f2 lens for the Z system. I will do a little bit of an unboxing for you guys and take some photos with it and let you know what I think. I was very excited to unbox this lens, and it seems that in my excitement I failed to set up the microphone correctly, and so I didn't want to subject your ears to the way that audio sounded. I'm just gonna voice over for a couple minutes here as I get this out of the box and take a look at it. So I ordered this from B&H Photo, and they did a great job of putting plenty of packing in at the top and around the box that the lens is in, just to make sure it's safe in shipping. Comes in a pretty small box that's fairly typical for Nikon's lenses. They really all kind of look the same. When you open it up, you'll just have the directions and the warranty information there in the top. Interestingly, there was a diagram of how to put the lens cap on. Then underneath of that is the lens wrapped up in some foam. Now there is nothing else in the box with this lens. There's no felt bag to put it in or a lens hood or anything like that. And one of the first things I did was compare it to the 35mm lens that I have, because they're really fairly similar. The 35mm is just slightly larger though, actually. And you can see here the plastic bayonet mount on the back and the front of the lens. So this is a 40mm prime lens, which means that it has a fixed focal length at 40mm. Now, prime lenses, because they don't have as many moving elements as zoom lenses, tend to be a little bit cheaper for a little bit higher quality. They have a little bit better of a kind of quality to cost ratio. And so this is kind of a budget option for the Z system. It's running at about $300 for the 40mm f2 lens. So you're getting a nice wide aperture for your money there. And it's at that fixed focal length, so it's fairly specialized in what it's doing. And it doesn't need as many different things with moving elements and the corrections for chromatic aberration and things like that at so many different focal lengths. So this is a budget lens that I think will be fairly popular for the Z system. It's kind of replacing actually the 35mm 1.8 lens that was available for the F mount. And so now you have this 40mm, slightly different, and f2 for the Z mount. That 35mm lens was very popular both in the full frame and the crop formats, and so I think that this lens will be fairly popular as well. And it cost me about $300 to get this from B&H Photo, and with the holidays coming up, Black Friday, you might be able to even get a little bit better of a deal on this if you check around. But as such, since it is just a $300 lens, I wouldn't really expect this lens to have the same quality as much more expensive lenses would have. And so as I'm reviewing it, I'm gonna not really take too many points off for it having a little bit lower quality than maybe a $600 lens might. Obviously, if it seems worse than it should for $300, that would be a big negative to me. But if it doesn't line up with those more expensive lenses, then that's not what I would expect. So I'm excited to test this lens out and use it for some different things, and especially to see how it compares to the 35mm lens. I've been using that 35mm lens for the actually the DX format, that cropped format that I had for my D30-100 on my Z6 II. Reason being, I really liked that lens on the D30-100, and it did have that 1.8 aperture with it, which was just really helpful for still life photos, some portraits, different things like that I like to take. I really like to get that nice creamy background. It was also really helpful for videos like the one that I'm filming right now. It's actually on my camera right now so that I get a little bit more background blur behind me. However, one of the problems that I have with that lens is that the focus in it is quite loud, and another issue that I have with it is that it can't cover the entire full frame sensor. So I'm interested to see how this one compares to it and if it can really make a full replacement for me. Alright, so getting into the build quality and the design of this lens, I would say from the build quality standpoint, this lens is not terrible, but it's not perfect either. So I do really like the size and weight of this. It's not particularly large, as you can see. And it's not very heavy. It probably just weighs a few ounces, really. And so if you're looking for something that's really light to carry around or really small to carry around, this is really nice. It feels really lightweight on the camera, which is really good. The glass on this does seem pretty high quality. And you know, the photos with it have looked good. But it does have a lot of plastic in it, and it does have a plastic bayonet mount on the back here, which means that it's not going to be quite as rugged as the other lenses, and it's not weather sealed quite as well either. Nikon says that this is going to be splash and dust resistant, but not really fully weather sealed, and so I would not, you know, test it too hard with the weather sealing. But then I'm pretty cautious to test fully weather sealed lenses too hard either. I like to try to keep my gear dry when possible. So essentially what that plastic means is that you're gonna want to be a little gentler with this lens. Don't slam it around, don't, you know, smash it on and off of the camera. Just treat it gently, and as long as you do that, it should hold up pretty well. The biggest concern for wear is that plastic bayonet mount. I wish that they had just spent a little bit more on it and put a metal mount on there, because these can wear out over time. But I think if you're gentle with it, I don't really think it'll be too much of a problem. Obviously, though, it's just come out, so we can't really say for sure on that until we've actually had it for a while. Now, one thing that I do miss on this lens is the vibration reduction that I have on my 24-200 millimeter lens. It's not quite as necessary on this, where it's a shorter focal length, and so I think that's why they left it off, just to save a little bit of money. But I do notice with this that I can't take quite as long of exposures as I would with the 24-200 millimeter lens without putting it on a tripod or something. That being said, you do have a wider aperture, so they could probably cover about the same amount of brightness. It would just be kind of cool if you had VR in this and could get a little longer exposure. I believe, though, that the 50mm 1.8 in the S line, that's about twice as expensive as this, does have that VR in it. So I think that's something that they just chose to put in their kind of more professional quality lens. So as I said, I've been using the 35mm lens for video adapted onto the Z6 II. That's what I'm using at the moment for this video, and it's good from a depth of field standpoint, but it makes an incredible amount of noise, which is kind of amusing to me because Nikon called it the silent wave motor when they released that lens. This lens is much quieter, though. You really don't hear it getting picked up in the shotgun mic the way that lens does, which is really helpful if you're trying to shoot video with it. You want to be able to put your mic on top of the camera most of the time. At least it's an option, right? And with the 35mm lens, I have to keep the mic farther away. Also, because the 35mm lens is getting cropped, this comes out as a wider focal length on my Z6 II, meaning I can get that camera a little bit closer to me. So for me personally, at least, I think this is going to work out really well for filming. Used it a little bit and the quality of it has looked really good. Everything's looked nice and clear and crisp and sharp, and I'm getting a nice creamy background behind me with it from that f2 aperture. Now, getting into some tricky aspects for the lens, the vignetting and the chromatic aberration. The first thing that I want to show you is I just did the same test with this lens as I did with the 24 to 200mm lens, which is to set a memory card on a piece of foam core just to use as a focal point, and then shoot some pictures with the flash so they're fairly bright against that foam core and see where vignettes show up on the white background. Now keep in mind that when I'm doing this, that's a particularly hard situation for the lens. It's a particularly obvious vignetting situation, and so that may not show up, and in fact I would say probably will not show up in any of your real world images, but it gives you an idea of the quality of the lens and what it might look like if you were to be shooting against some sort of a really light background or something like that. As you can see here, there is a little bit of vignetting throughout the photos and throughout the apertures, mostly at the widest apertures, but really I don't think it's that severe, and I don't think that you're particularly likely to see it in your photos. I haven't actually seen it out in the wild yet. Now, as far as chromatic aberration, or that fringing, usually purple fringing, I really have not seen a whole lot of that from this lens in most situations, which I think maybe puts it a little bit ahead of the 35mm lens. I feel like I'm getting less chromatic aberration with this, although it's hard to really say without having side-by-side comparisons in every situation. Now, I set up my test again that I did last time with the tactical light behind the little cactus. And so that's a very high contrast situation and a backlighting. You can see that there's a little bit of fringing going on here. It's not really too bad though, considering that this is very extreme lighting. But it does seem like it's a little bit worse than what you would get from the 24 to 200 lens that I looked at before, which really doesn't have hardly any fringing at all. But this lens is a lot cheaper than that one, so I would kind of expect it to suffer a little bit more in this area. I think it's relatively comparable or slightly better to that 35mm budget lens that sort of is its predecessor. Alright, so let's take a look at some photos that I've taken with this lens. So first off, I have this picture of a jar here. This was one of the first photos that I took with the lens. It was the first thing that I really set up and took a picture of. Everything else was just random snapshots testing it out. I took this with the lens wide open at f2. The background I think looks really soft, which is quite nice. I could ask for the writing on the jar to be just a bit sharper, but that's probably a difference that you're gonna see between this and the more expensive lenses, as well as, like I said, this was the first photo, and I think I could have just done a little bit better once I got used to the lens, as we'll see later on. So next we have this shot of some berries. I think these are honeysuckle or something, and this was during our actual first snowfall that we had a while back. It was just kind of a little bit of short-lived snow, but we did actually get some snow. And I shot this at f4, and it looks super sharp to me. I think I'm noticing that wide open at f2, it can be a little bit soft, but then maybe by around f2.8 or so, it starts to sharpen up. It's kind of hard to say, honestly, though, if that's because this lens doesn't perform well wide open, or if that's because I may be missing the focus because the depth of field is so small. I think what I would suggest is putting it into continue autofocus or putting it on a tripod, because it's a bit easy to lose the focus when you have such a shallow depth of field there, which is what I kind of discovered as I practiced with this lens more. And so finally, here is a shot of my new sunglasses and a bowl of oranges that I took the other day for sort of a last kind of summer photo shoot for the year. And this I shot at f2 again, but I was more careful with having it in a continuous autofocus in case I moved closer or farther away, more careful to stay in place, and use the tripod for some of the shots to make sure I didn't wiggle around and change the focus, and those looked sharper to me. So I think that really was the difference there on the sharpness, is just making sure that you get it in focus if you're using that really shallow depth of field at the wider end. And then here is another one, the same way. I used a tripod for this one, and I think that looks pretty sharp. And then for comparison, I wanted to take a look at how the 35mm lens did with the same photo. So I put it on the Z6 II, and this is that photo, which looks pretty similar to me. And then here's with the 35mm on the D3100 that I originally got it for, cut it just for kicks, and you can see that the color from that camera looks kind of weird there. This was the right out of camera unedited JPEGs, and the color looks a little weird, and the photo does not look nearly as sharp as it did when it was adapted onto the Z6 II. So overall, I think that this is an excellent lens. I have been really happy with it so far, and I think that it makes a great replacement for the 35mm lens that I have been using, both in terms of photos and in terms of videos. They're really fairly similar, but they are for different mounts, and so this one lets me put it natively onto the Z6 II, which is really helpful. So if you didn't have that 35mm lens before, and you have a Z camera, then you would want to get this for it, obviously for that native mount. Or if you have it already and you're adapting it, you do get a little bit of an advantage from putting it on natively. I feel like the autofocus is a little bit snappier when it's not adapted, and you don't have to mess with the FTZ adapter, putting that on and off. This lens is not a professional quality lens. It's gonna suffer a little bit from fringing, a little bit of softness now and then. And it doesn't have any vibration reduction in it, but it's not marketed as a professional lens, and it's not at a professional price. It's a little more expensive than how you can sometimes pick up these 35mm lenses now, just because they're getting old, but at $300 it's really still in the budget price range, and so I would not expect it to be a professional quality, but for those more casual types of scenarios, I do still think it's a really good quality lens. You're not really gonna have complaints about it. So it's really fun to shoot with if you're wanting to do some like product photography type shots, some video, some low light things, some portraits, a little bit of all of that, whatever. And if that describes what you do, then I would highly recommend this lens. It's really quite fun to shoot with, and the pictures from it do look really good. Plus, at only $300, it's not really gonna break the bank to have a lot of fun with. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this review, and if you did, do go ahead and hit the like button on your way out, as well as subscribe to the channel to see more things like this, more landscape photography things, and some creative lifestyle things and so forth. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.